This is Mundell Lowe. You're listening to Real Jazz on San Diego's Jazz 88.3.
We're here at Jazz Live San Diego with Mundell Lowe. Welcome to Jazz Live San Diego, Mundell.
Thank you, Vince. Thank you.
Well, congratulations, first of all, on your recent birthday. 90 years old, I guess, at the end of April, huh?
Yeah, April 21st.
Well, congratulations, and you look like you're doing great, so that's good to see.
Well, I gained a lot of weight from all of these birthday cakes that I keep getting.
I was going to say, recently looking through the paper, it seems like every other week there was a new Mundell Lowe birthday celebration or a concert. You seem to be playing a lot, and has that been real enjoyable?
Well, it's just about as much as I want to do. It's when you get to be 90 years old, your energy level drops a little bit, so you have to be cool, as the kids say.
And you're still doing that, maintaining your cool through all of that.
Got to do it. It's in my soul.
Well, tell us a little bit about the band that you've brought here tonight to Jazz Live.
I brought a bunch of the best guys I could find. Ron Eshtay, wonderful guitarist. We're going to have two guitars, a keyboard, and drums. And, of course, Bill Cunliffe, who is a demon on the keyboards. And my old friend, the great tapper, Jim Plank.
And tell us a little bit about your history with these musicians. These aren't guys that you've just pulled together for this gig.
Well, actually, they are. We
really?
work together, not all together at the same time, but with each other. And way back when I lived in New York, I did a couple of weekends with Jimmy Smith, and I got the sound of the Hammond B3 in my ears. And when this came up, I had heard Bill Cunliffe play, and I thought, what a good idea. So we put the two guitars together with him, and it's I don't need a bass player. He's wonderful with what he does with his left hand. And, of course, Jim Plank's going to hold the whole thing together.
So tell us a little bit then more about this sound, this organ-based sound, and why it attracted you so much.
Well, it's just the timbre of the sound of the Hammond B3. You know, it's so distinctive that once you hear it, you can't forget it. It's there. So I'm really looking forward to this tonight.
And when you were originally hearing it with, you were saying Jimmy Smith, who was playing guitar with Jimmy at that time?
Well, at the time, I think Kenny Burrell was playing with him, but when he couldn't make it, I came in for a couple of weekends and helped out, as they say. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was fun.
Well, what traits, you've had such a great long career in jazz, and I'm wondering, just in your own words, what traits in you have allowed you to kind of thrive all these years in music and in jazz?
Well, not to be facetious, but I was born and raised on a farm down in Mississippi, and anything is better than that. So I started hanging out in New Orleans, and I heard the guys playing jazz, and I thought, wait a minute, that's better than, for me, better than country music. So I started hanging out with these guys and playing with them, and one thing led to another. Next thing I knew, I was in New York working with the big boys.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been fun.
That time in New York, that was right after the war, correct?
Yes, I went to New York the beginning of 1946.
Mm-hmm.
And to join Ray McKinley's band. Ray was the guy that took over when Glenn Miller disappeared, of course. And when he got back to the States after the war, he organized a band with Eddie Sauter doing the writing for it. And that's the band I wound up in. And it was a wonderful, exploratory, adventurous band.
Mm-hmm. And the scene there in New York at that time was undergoing some changes too, with the swing era kind of on its down and bebop coming. What was that like for you?
I spent a lot of time on 52nd Street listening to the incoming crowd, which was bebop, Bird and Dizzy and some of the Wardell Gray, some of those guys. And it sounded very attractive. And so in the meantime, when I got to New York, first thing I did was get a good teacher. Mm. And I started studying ferociously orchestration, conducting, how you do that whole thing, and also listening to what was happening with music. And I didn't want to go the way some of the older guys said, we're in the swing thing. They said, I don't like this bebop. It's swing for me. Well, that's one thing, but you got to progress if you're going to stay in this business and do what your ears tell you.
Well, that seems to be a very familiar thing with you, in that you have progressed and you actually even branched out. And I was kind of struck by you talking about how you dug in and learned not just playing. You weren't just woodshedding. You were actually doing writing and composition and those things. What really drove you to do that part of music?
Well, I had been at NBC on staff there and in the news and special events department, and they were doing specials like Castro's Year of Power, the something about baseball, the marriage rackets, those things that lasted for an hour back in those days. And so I had to score those shows. So that's somewhere along the line, I went out to California with my family to spend Christmas. And I ran into Jackie Cooper, who gave me a job at Screen Gems as a composer. So it was kind of as simple as that.
So
I stayed there for 9 years.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering about that period when you were in New York, which seemed like the jazz capital of the world, and still kind of does. But then to move to Los Angeles seemed like kind of getting out of that main jazz scene and coming to Los Angeles. But that was driven by some other things, like a new job and work in other fields, right?
Not only that, but I saw that things were dying in New York, jazz-wise, and they had gone down to just 2 or 3 places that you could play. Mm. And I thought about this very carefully. I've always tried to be a little bit of a businessman. The kicks are one thing, but at the end of the day, you have to take some rubles home in your pocket. Mm-hmm. So that's what, when this job was offered to me at a pretty good salary, I said, of course.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to go back and touch on something that I didn't quite get to before. Is before you came to New York and when you were in training in World War II, that experience there, and I'm not exactly sure it was down south, but it was in an army or in a military that was still segregated. But you had the opportunity to hear music that was being blended at that time too.
Well, I was in the army with this was the Camp Plachet, just outside of New Orleans. I was in the Army with a fellow named John Hammond of fame, Count Basie, Charlie Christian, Mary Lou Williams, and we kind of took to each other, and he said, there's a black battalion across the street here with some guys in it, like Buck Clayton, Lester Young, people like this, and he says, I'm going to organize a jam session at the Officers Club or the Enlisted Men's Club for Saturday afternoon and start putting things together. Well, he didn't have any sweat because, you see, he had a lot of juice. John Hammond's grandmother was Mrs. Vanderbilt. Mm. So he had going in. He never took advantage of that, but when he needed it, he would throw that name up there and people would back off quickly. So that's how we got involved. I met all these people. We played together. We loved together. It was just great.
Were you hearing some new things that you hadn't heard before when you were exposed there?
Well, yeah, because being in the Army, coming from the South, Dixieland was kind of what I was doing in New Orleans. And coming from the South, it's either country or Dixieland. All of a sudden, I'm talking to the greatest swing players that there ever was.
Mm-hmm.
So I started listening very heavily to them, and I decided that's where it is,
Mm-hmm.
at least for the time being.
Right. Another part of your career that is totally noteworthy is your accompanying vocalists and singers, and that seems to be something that has been a mutual love. They love having you, and you seem to really thrive in that environment. Tell us a little bit about how you got involved in that, and some of the things that brings out in you and your playing.
Well, the way that whole thing started, I was, as I said before, at NBC.
Mm-hmm.
And in those days, they'd have these little radio shows, 15 minutes, with various girl singers or boy singers, and some of them wanted to sing with the guitar as opposed to the piano, just to break up the flavor of everything. So I got into that, and I realized that, for instance, I would be given an assignment that we're going to do such a tune on Monday on the 5 o'clock show. Well, I'd take that music home, and I'd not only learn the music, but I would learn the words. Because if the singer live on the air happens to skip a beat, I can catch her because I know where she is or he is.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of grew into the accompanying thing. And I think one of my most memorable times was a CD I made with Sarah Vaughan, George DeVille, and I, called After Hours. An interesting thing, that record was made way back at the end of the 50s. Now, I do seminars and things like this at the colleges and schools of music, and I've discovered that in many schools they use that record as how you should sing a song, and how you should accompany a song, which completely surprised me.
What an honor to have that as part of your legacy.
Well, if it helps them, I'm all for it.
Excellent. So I'm wondering if you can share with us some artists that you might not have had the opportunity to work with yet, that you might. Have you had that thought about what's on your bucket list of musical things to do in your life?
Well, back in the New York days,
Mm-hmm.
I worked with all the guys there, and the gals, and when I got to California, I discovered that there's some good guys out here too. So one thing just led to another, and I'm very happy working with them.
You feel like you've gotten to do.
Well, you grow when
Yeah.
you work with people that are saying something different.
Mm-hmm.
You keep your ears open and you listen, and you take that as a lesson and take it home with you.
Mm-hmm. Have there been any artists that you've wanted to work with that you now won't have the opportunity?
Not too many.
Really?
Not too many. Somewhere along the line, I've been doing this now for 70 years,
Mm-hmm.
and it's so I've run across or recorded with or played with most everybody that I'm interested in anyway.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is quite an honor to have you here, and
Thank you.
And to be celebrating your 90th birthday with you here too at Jazz Live. Thank you so much for being here at Jazz Live San Diego.
Thank you, Vance.